A rich man, owner of a famous city betting arena, plans to use his most fierce horse to get rid of his autistic daughter. But the cruel plan to expose the fragile girl against the animal known for its aggressiveness turns into a scene that no one could predict. When a majestic white horse that has always protected the child heroically jumps into the arena. What happens between the two horses and the girl left everyone speechless. The golden afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the equestrian arena, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the packed earth where horses' hooves echoed in a mesmerizing rhythm. Marina watched every movement with bright eyes, her small fingers tapping complex patterns against the side of her chair, a comforting ritual that helped her process all the sensory stimulation around her. At 7, Marina possessed a perception of the world different from most children. While others were distracted by conversations or games, she noticed details that escaped adults. The way the chestnut horse favored its left leg, indicating subtle discomfort, or how the scent of fine leather intensified when her father got nervous during investor meetings. Eduardo Sterling gazed at his daughter from a distance, a mix of shame and growing irritation contorting his features. Owner of one of the country's largest equestrian estates, he had built an empire based on deep-rooted traditions and prestigious events that attracted the nation's elite. Every detail of his public life was meticulously calculated to convey success, sophistication, and family perfection. Marina's presence constantly threatened this carefully constructed image. Her repetitive movements, her tendency to verbalize inconvenient observations at the wrong time, and her inability to grasp the social nuances he considered essential, created embarrassing situations that left him seething. "Marina, stop that!" he muttered through gritted teeth, approaching his daughter as a group of Japanese investors observed the horse presentation. Her fingers continued their rhythmic pattern, seemingly oblivious to her father's command. The girl looked up, those extraordinarily expressive eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. "Daddy, why is the man in the grey suit lying about the numbers?" she asked, with the brutal honesty that characterized her condition. "He said 300,000, but the paper on your desk said 500,000. Eduardo felt his blood run cold. Marina had been in his office the morning before, playing silently in a corner while he conducted a delicate negotiation on the phone. He had completely underestimated his daughter's ability to absorb and retain complex information. "You shouldn't repeat those things," he said, forcing a smile as he knelt to her eye level. "Those are adult conversations you don't understand." But Marina understood more than he imagined. Her exceptional mind processed patterns and inconsistencies with a clarity that would impress specialists. She had memorized not only numbers but also names, dates, and details of conversations her father believed had gone unnoticed. Across the arena, Hope, the white horse Eduardo, kept more for sentimental reasons than commercial value, raised her head in Marina's direction. The animal had developed an inexplicable connection with the girl over the years, demonstrating infinite patience with her unique behaviors. While other horses grew agitated by Marina's repetitive movements, Hope remained calm, almost protective. This special relationship deeply irritated Eduardo, who saw in it yet more evidence of his daughter's abnormality. "Mrs. Sterling," the governess called, approaching discreetly. Isabel had worked for the family for 2 decades and had watched Marina grow up since birth. "The young lady needs her afternoon snack." Eduardo waved impatiently, wishing all evidence of Marina's condition would simply vanish. He didn't realize that, at that moment, his daughter observed every micro-expression on his face, registering the rejection with a painful precision her young mind could not yet fully process. Marina stood obediently, but her eyes remained fixed on her father for a moment longer. There was something different in the air today, a tension her acute senses detected but her limited experience couldn't interpret. As she walked beside Isabel, She didn't know she had just witnessed the moment her father made a terrible decision, a decision that would change their lives forever. Night had fallen over the Sterling estate like a thick cloak, but Marina remained awake in her room, watching the lights turn on and off in her father's office window. Her sleep patterns had always been irregular, and she had learned to find comfort in the silent observation of the nocturnal world. Isabel had tried to put her to sleep earlier, as always, but the internal agitation Marina felt since the afternoon kept her alert. Her fingers traced invisible circles on the blanket, a movement that calmed her as her mind processed the day's information. Downstairs, Eduardo received visitors who arrived discreetly through the side entrance of the house. Marina had noticed this pattern for weeks. Men in dark suits who avoided the main entrance and spoke in whispers. Her natural curiosity led her to pay attention to everything happening around her, even when adults assumed she wasn't listening. "It needs to be before the main event," said a deep voice Marina recognized as belonging to the man who had visited her father the week before. "After that, it'll be too late to contain the damage." Eduardo paced nervously around the office, his familiar footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. Marina knew every sound in that house, every creak and whisper that others ignored. Her hypersensitive hearing picked up conversations happening 3 rooms away. "The girl knows more than she should," her father murmured, and Marina felt a shiver run down her spine. They were talking about her. Yesterday she repeated exact numbers from a conversation I was sure she wasn't listening to. Clara Sterling, Marina's mother, remained in the living room pretending to read a magazine, but her hands trembled slightly. She had also noticed the changes in her husband's behavior, the way he looked at Marina with an expression that deeply frightened her. 20 years of marriage had taught Clara to recognize the signs of when Eduardo was planning something. Her financial and emotional dependence had always prevented her from questioning his decisions, but recently a growing unease had taken hold of her heart. In the backyard, through her bedroom window, Marina watched her father burn documents in a metal drum. The flames danced against the darkness, creating shadows that moved like ghosts. She didn't understand why he did this, but her meticulous mind registered every detail. "Why does Daddy burn papers at night?" she had asked Isabel the morning before, with that direct honesty that characterized her interactions. The governess had become visibly uncomfortable, quickly changing the subject. Isabel, in turn, felt the weight of decades of silence. She had witnessed Marina's growth since infancy, accompanied her first words, her first steps, and gradually understood that the girl was special in a way Eduardo refused to accept. The governess's loyalty had always been to the family, but recently she had begun to question what that loyalty truly meant. To protect Eduardo from his own destructive actions, or to protect Marina from a father who clearly felt ashamed of his own daughter. From the stables came soft sounds, Hope whinnying softly, as if also sensing the tension hanging over the estate. The white horse had developed a habit of becoming restless during the nights when the mysterious visitors appeared. Marina leaned her face against the cold window, watching the stars twinkle above. Her exceptional mind connected dots that adults assumed were beyond her comprehension. The numbers she had memorized, the whispered names, the burned documents, the nocturnal visitors, everything formed a pattern she still couldn't fully interpret. 450,000 for the head judge, she murmured to herself, repeating a phrase she had heard in the office. Cayman Bank, account 78921. Her photographic memory stored information like a computer without filters or judgments. Downstairs, the meeting was ending. Eduardo escorted the visitors out, his tense posture revealing the weight of the decisions he was making. When he returned to the office, he picked up the phone and dialed a number Marina had heard before. "It's for next week," he said in a low voice. "Prepare everything exactly as we discussed. There can be no margin for error." Marina didn't know she had just heard her father authorize the preparations for what he hoped would be the final solution to his problem. The following morning brought with it a charged atmosphere that Marina felt the moment she opened her eyes. Her acute senses picked up emotional nuances that others completely missed. The way Isabel avoided her gaze during breakfast, the tension in her mother's shoulders, her father's forced silence. Marina walked down the stairs with her characteristic steps, avoiding stepping on the joints between the wooden stairs. This small routine calmed her, creating order in a world that often overwhelmed her with excessive stimuli. "Good morning, my love," Clara said, forcing a smile as she served breakfast. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the cup, a detail that did not escape Marina's meticulous observation. Eduardo remained buried behind his newspaper, but Marina could feel his irritation radiating like heat. She had learned to recognize these moods, although she didn't fully understand their causes or consequences. "Daddy," she said in her clear, direct voice. "Yesterday, you talked about wrong numbers with the man in the gray suit. Why do people lie about money?" The newspaper slowly lowered, revealing Eduardo's icy eyes. "Marina, I've told you not to repeat conversations you don't understand. Go play outside." The rejection cut deeply, though Marina had no words to describe the pain she felt. Her condition made her unable to filter the brutal honesty that characterized her questions, but it also prevented her from understanding why that honesty irritated adults so much. Walking towards the stable, Marina found her usual refuge. Hope raised her head the moment she approached, emitting a soft whinny that sounded almost like an affectionate greeting. The white horse possessed extraordinary patience with the girl's unique behaviors. While other animals grew agitated by her repetitive movements, Hope remained serene, as if instinctively understanding that Marina was different, but not inferior. "Hi, Hope," she whispered, extending her hand to touch the velvety muzzle. "You understand when I tell the truth, don't you?" The horse tilted her head, coming closer. There was a silent communication between them that transcended words, a pure connection based on mutual acceptance and absolute trust. Isabel watched from the stable door, her heart aching as she witnessed the only truly harmonious relationship in Marina's life. 2 decades working for the Sterlings had taught her to recognize cruelty when she saw it. And recently, she had noticed alarming signs in Eduardo's behavior. "The girl isn't well," Isabel murmured to herself, noting how Marina seemed more tense, her repetitive movements more intense since the previous week. From the office came voices. Eduardo on the phone again, speaking in low, urgent tones. Isabel approached discreetly, her growing concern overriding decades of professional discretion. "The animal needs to be sufficiently agitated," Eduardo was saying. "Use whatever it takes, but ensure he's uncontrollable during the presentation." Isabel felt a shiver run down her spine. Eduardo was talking about horses, but there was something in the intonation of his voice that deeply frightened her. Marina, still in the stable, began to perceive subtle changes in the behavior of the other animals. Her exceptional sensitivity picked up tensions that even experienced handlers might miss. The horses seemed restless, especially Thunder, the black stallion known for his aggression. "Hope," she murmured, stroking the silky mane. "Why is everyone scared?" The white horse turned towards the main arena, her ears erect, picking up sounds Marina could not yet hear. There were men approaching, men whose scent and energy Hope clearly disapproved of. Clara appeared at the stable door, her expression revealing an internal struggle that had lasted for weeks. "Marina, darling, come for lunch." "Mommy," Marina said with that devastating honesty that characterized all her interactions. "Daddy doesn't like me, does he?" The question cut Clara like a blade. For years, she had tried to protect her daughter from Eduardo's evident rejection, creating excuses and justifications that sounded hollow even to herself. "Of course he likes you," Clara lied, hating herself for every false word. He doesn't know how to show it." Marina tilted her head, studying her mother's face with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see through well-intentioned lies. "You're crying inside," she observed. "Your eyes do the same thing as mine when I'm sad, but can't cry." Her daughter's exceptional perception left Clara speechless. How could a 7-year-old child read emotions with such precision while her own father remained blind to her basic needs for acceptance and love? As they walked back to the house, Marina looked over her shoulder at Hope. The horse watched her intently, as if sensing that important changes were coming, changes that would test the strength of their special connection. The following days brought a tense routine to the Sterling estate. Marina continued her meticulous observations, unaware that every memorized word, every detail registered by her exceptional mind, was becoming a growing threat to her father's security. During lunch, she surprised everyone by spontaneously reciting a sequence of numbers she had heard in a phone conversation. "Daddy, what does offshore account 379421 in the Cayman Islands Bank mean?" Eduardo's fork froze in midair, his eyes narrowing dangerously. Clara choked on her water, and Isabel, who was serving dessert, almost dropped the tray. "Where did you hear that?" Eduardo asked. His voice controlled, but filled with a coldness that made Marina instinctively recoil. "You spoke on the phone last night," she replied with her characteristic honesty, "when the man asked about transferring the money before the audit." The silence that followed was deafening. Eduardo understood at that moment the real extent of the problem his daughter represented. Her photographic memory was not just an interesting peculiarity, it was a ticking time bomb that could destroy decades of careful construction of his financial empire. Clara watched her husband with growing horror. The expression on his face was no longer just irritation or shame, it was something much darker and more dangerous. "Eduardo," she murmured, "she's just a child who repeats things that could ruin us," he replied through gritted teeth. Rising abruptly from the table, Marina didn't understand the gravity of the situation, but her acute senses picked up the drastic change in the atmosphere. Her repetitive movements intensified, her fingers tapping faster as she tried to process the confused emotions she detected in the adults around her. Isabel discreetly approached the girl. "Marina, darling, how about we go see Hope? In the stable, away from the tense gazes of the main house." Marina finally relaxed. Hope greeted her with her usual soft whinny, but Isabel noticed that the horse seemed more protective than usual, positioning herself between Marina and the entrance like a living barrier. "Isabel," Marina said as she stroked the horse's mane, "why do people get mad when I tell the truth?" The governess felt her heart clench. How to explain to a child that her brutal honesty, a beautiful and pure characteristic of her condition, was seen by her own father as an existential threat? "Sometimes adults do things they shouldn't," Isabel said carefully, "and when someone talks about those things, they get scared." "Daddy is scared of me?" Marina asked, her small voice revealing a vulnerability that broke Isabel's heart. Before the governess could answer, voices approached the stable. Eduardo walked quickly, accompanied by a man Isabel didn't recognize, someone with a crude appearance and clothes that smelled of sweat and chemicals. "It's this one," Eduardo said, pointing to Thunder, the black stallion who was nervously agitated in his stall. "He needs to be completely uncontrollable next week." The stranger examined the animal with experienced eyes. "I can use chemical stimulants, but it'll be dangerous for anyone who gets near." "That's exactly the goal," Eduardo replied, his voice filled with a coldness that made Isabel and Marina flinch behind Hope's stall. Marina heard every word, her mind automatically registering the conversation. Thunder was one of the most aggressive horses on the property, known for having seriously injured 2 handlers in the past. Why did her father want to make him even more dangerous? Hope began to agitate. Her ears turned towards the men. The white horse seemed to sense an imminent threat, a danger her protective nature couldn't ignore. "When will it be done?" Eduardo asked. "On the day of the event," An injection a few hours before the presentation, and the animal will be completely out of control. Marina absorbed every detail, without understanding that she was hearing the preparations for what her father hoped would be her own destruction. Her condition prevented her from processing human malice in its purest form, especially when it came from someone who should protect her. Isabel, however, understood perfectly. Decades of silent loyalty crumbled in seconds as she realized the extent of Eduardo's depravity. He wasn't just ashamed of Marina, he was planning something terrible. When the men left, Isabel made a decision that would change everything. For the first time in 20 years, she would break her professional silence. Marina needed protection, and if Eduardo wouldn't provide that protection, someone else would have to. "Marina," she said softly, "from now on, you must not be alone with your father. Always call me if he wants to take you somewhere." Marina tilted her head, confused. "Why?" Isabel looked into the child's innocent eyes, fighting back tears that threatened to fall. "Because sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us do bad things, and I will never let anything bad happen to you." The week advanced with increasing tension that seemed to contaminate every corner of the Sterling estate. Marina felt this change in her body, her repetitive movements intensifying as an outlet for the anxiety she couldn't name or fully comprehend. Isabel had begun secretly documenting everything she witnessed. In a small notebook hidden in her room, she recorded conversations, suspicious behaviors, and Eduardo's growing cruelty towards his daughter. Decades of professional silence had crumbled before the urgent need to protect Marina. "He's planning something terrible," Isabel murmured as she wrote, her hands trembling slightly. "I need to find a way to stop it." In the living room, Clara finally gathered the courage to confront her husband. 20 years of silent submission had created a difficult pattern to break, but maternal instinct finally overcame fear. "Eduardo, you need to stop this," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "Marina is our daughter. She cannot be treated as a problem to be eliminated." Eduardo looked up from the documents he was examining, his expression cold as ice. "You don't understand the gravity of the situation. This girl can destroy everything we've built. She's just a child with a special condition," Clara exclaimed, her voice rising for the first time in years. "She needs love and acceptance, not rejection and cruelty." "Love doesn't pay bills or keep investigators away from our door," Eduardo replied, with a coldness that made Clara recoil. "She knows things that could send me to prison. Numbers, names, details of operations no child should know." Marina, who was playing silently in the hallway, heard every word of the argument. Her hypersensitive hearing picked up not only the words, but also the emotional nuances behind them. She didn't fully understand about prison or investigators, but she knew they were bad things. In the stable, Hope demonstrated increasingly protective behavior. The white horse seemed to sense the imminent danger, remaining constantly alert whenever Marina was nearby. Her gentle nature had acquired a vigilant quality that did not go unnoticed by the other handlers. "This horse is acting strange," one of the stable hands commented. "He acts like he's guarding something." Marina found Isabel in the stable during the afternoon, and for the first time, the governess decided to be completely honest with the girl, adapting her language to be understandable without being frightening. "Marina, do you remember when we talked about people who do bad things?" Isabel asked, kneeling to be at the child's eye level. "Yes," Marina replied, her fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. "You said that sometimes people get scared when someone tells the truth about those things." "Exactly. And sometimes those people try to make it so that whoever knows the truth can't tell it anymore." Marina processed this information with her characteristic logic. "Daddy doesn't want me to tell about the numbers and the names." Isabel felt tears welling in her eyes. "No, darling. And that's why you need to promise me one thing. Whenever your father wants to take you somewhere alone, you come find me first." "Why?" Marina asked with her direct curiosity, because sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us forget how to do that. And I will never forget to protect you. That night, Clara made a decision that would change the course of events. She sought Isabel in her kitchen, where the governess was preparing dinner with mechanical movements, her mind clearly preoccupied. "Isabel," Clara said, her voice low and urgent, "I know you've noticed the changes in Eduardo. I know you're worried about Marina." The governess stopped chopping vegetables, her hands freezing on the cutting board. "Mrs. Sterling, please, call me Clara, and tell me the truth. What have you seen? What have you heard?" Isabel looked into the eyes of the woman she had served for 2 decades, seeing for the first time not the distant employer, but a desperate mother trying to protect her daughter. "He's planning to use thunder at next week's event," Isabel said slowly. "I saw him talking to a man about making the horse aggressive, uncontrollable." Clara felt her blood run cold. "And Marina? I don't know for sure. But I'm afraid, Clara, very afraid of what he might be planning." The 2 women looked at each other in silence, understanding that they had crossed an irreversible line. From that moment on, they were no longer employee and employer, but 2 women united by the urgent need to protect an innocent child. "We'll need proof," Clara finally said. "If Eduardo is planning something terrible, we need evidence that prevents him from hurting our Marina." Isabel nodded gravely. The silent war for Marina's soul had officially begun, and they were the only line of defense between the girl and the malice of her own father. The Sterling estate buzzed with preparations for the annual event that attracted the country's equestrian elite. Elegant tents were erected, tracks were meticulously prepared, and the main arena received its final adjustments. To outside observers, everything seemed normal, but a sinister atmosphere hung over the backstage. Marina watched all the commotion with growing fascination. Her detail-oriented mind registered every change, every new face, every different sound that added to the symphony of preparations. She loved this annual event, unaware that her father planned for it to be the last of her life. Eduardo personally supervised every detail, but his attention was focused on aspects no one else noticed. He double-checked the exact location of the arena where thunder would be presented, calculated viewing angles to ensure hundreds of witnesses would see what appeared to be a tragic accident. "Thunder's presentation will be at 3 in the afternoon," he told the corrupt handler he had hired. "I want the animal to be completely out of control. Use whatever it takes." The man nodded with a cruel smile. Decades of working with horses had taught him exactly how to turn a normally aggressive animal into an unpredictable machine of destruction. Isabel stayed close to Marina whenever possible, her constant vigilance beginning to draw attention. Other staff members noticed how the governess rarely left the girl alone, especially when Eduardo was nearby. "You're overdoing it with the little one," one of the gardeners commented. "She's 7 years old. She can take care of herself. Not when there are dangers she can't recognize," Isabel replied enigmatically, her eyes always alert. Clara, meanwhile, had begun her own discreet investigation. For years she had ignored the questionable aspects of her husband's business. But now every document, every phone call, every nocturnal visitor became a piece of potential evidence. In Eduardo's office, she found papers that confirmed her worst fears. Records of offshore transactions, correspondence with dubious figures, and most alarming of all, a substantial life insurance policy in Marina's name that had been discreetly taken out the month before. "My God," Clara whispered, her hands trembling as she photographed the documents with her cell phone. "He's really planning." Marina, unaware of the sinister plans unfolding around her, continued her daily routine of visiting Hope. The white horse demonstrated increasingly unusual behavior, remaining constantly on alert, her ears always erect, picking up sounds that other animals ignored. "Hope, do you also feel something is different?" Marina murmured, stroking the velvety muzzle. "Everyone is acting strange. The horse emitted a low whinny that sounded almost like agreement. There was a communication between them that transcended words, a pure connection based on instinct and mutual trust. During the afternoon, Marina witnessed a scene that confused her deeply. She saw the strange man approach Thunder's stall with a syringe, applying something to the black stallion's neck. The animal agitated violently, its eyes acquiring a wild gleam that frightened her. "Isabel," she said later, "why did the man give Thunder an injection? He wasn't sick." The governess felt her blood run cold. "What man, darling?" Marina described in detail what she had seen, her visual memory providing precise descriptions that confirmed Isabel's worst fears. The plan was being set in motion. That night, Isabel and Clara met secretly in the kitchen after Eduardo fell asleep. The documents Clara had photographed confirmed a network of corruption that went far beyond what either of them had imagined. "He took out a life insurance policy for Marina," Clara said, her voice broken by emotion. $2 million in case of accidental death." Isabel closed her eyes, fighting the nausea that overwhelmed her. "And tomorrow is Thunder's presentation. We have to do something," Clara said desperately. "We can't let him hurt our girl." "I've already contacted the authorities," Isabel revealed, "but they need more evidence. We need to catch him red-handed." Clara looked out the window towards the stable, where hope remained restless even in the darkness. "But what if we don't make it in time?" Isabel followed her gaze, an iron determination forming in her heart. "Then we'll have to protect her ourselves, whatever the cost." The night wind carried the scent of an approaching storm, as if nature itself sensed the tragedy Eduardo planned for the next day. Marina slept peacefully in her room, unaware that two brave women had sworn to protect her with their own lives. The day of the event dawned with a sky heavy with dark clouds that seemed to presage the emotional storm to come. Marina woke with a strange feeling in her chest, a restlessness that her young mind couldn't process, but that her acute instincts recognized as imminent danger. The estate was buzzing. Hundreds of important guests arrived in luxurious cars, the rural elite flaunting their best clothes and most expensive jewelry. Reporters from specialized outlets photographed every detail, and Eduardo circulated among the guests with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Marina, dressed in her best white dress, a choice by Eduardo that would gain sinister meaning later, observed everything with her bright eyes. Her repetitive movements had intensified drastically, her fingers tapping complex patterns that revealed her growing anxiety. "Darling, you look beautiful," Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady as she adjusted her daughter's dress. Her hands trembled imperceptibly. She knew this could be the last day she saw Marina alive if they couldn't stop Eduardo's plans. Isabel remained glued to Marina, her constant vigilance now disguised as special care for the event. Each time Eduardo approached the girl, the governess found an excuse to interfere, creating protective barriers that began to visibly irritate the businessman. "Isabel, can you give me a moment with my own daughter?" Eduardo said through gritted teeth, his patience clearly exhausted. "Of course, Mr. Sterling," Isabel replied, but her eyes remained fixed on Marina. "I'll be right there if you need me." At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, an hour before Thunder's fateful presentation, something happened that Eduardo could never have predicted. Dr. Robert Hayes, the official veterinarian of the Equestrian Federation and an old acquaintance of the family, arrived unexpectedly for a surprise routine inspection. "Eduardo, my friend," exclaimed Dr. Hayes, approaching with a clipboard and his professional bag. "I hope you don't mind, but I received an anonymous tip about possible use of prohibited substances in some animals. I need to examine the horses that will be presented today." Eduardo felt the world collapse around him. A veterinary inspection at that specific moment would reveal the drugs that had been administered to Thunder, exposing his entire diabolical plan. "This is highly irregular," Eduardo protested, trying to maintain his composure. There was no prior notice. Doping complaints are never announced in advance, the veterinarian replied with a professional smile. I'm sure you, as an ethical organizer, will have no problem with a routine check. Isabel and Clara exchanged significant glances from a distance. The anonymous tip had been made by Isabel the night before, a desperate move to buy time and expose Eduardo's criminal preparations. As Dr. Hayes headed to the stables, Eduardo panicked. His carefully orchestrated plan was crumbling, and worse still, the veterinary investigation could reveal not only Thunder's doping, but also raise questions about his other illegal activities. Marina, observing the growing agitation around her, instinctively went to Hope. The white horse was visibly restless, pacing nervously in her stall as if sensing traumatic events approaching. Hope, do you also feel the danger? She whispered, stroking the animal's neck. Everyone is scared today. In the stable, Dr. Hayes began his systematic examination. When he reached Thunder's stall, the black stallion displayed extremely aggressive and anomalous behavior. His eyes were dilated, his breathing rapid, and he threw himself against the bars with a violence that alarmed the experienced veterinarian. This animal has been recently medicated, Dr. Hayes murmured, making careful notes. The behavior is consistent with chemical stimulants. Eduardo watched from a distance, his mind racing for alternatives. With Thunder compromised by the veterinary investigation, his original plan had become impossible, but his sick obsession with eliminating Marina had grown beyond reason. In a moment of despair and fury, Eduardo made an impulsive decision that would change everything. If he couldn't use Thunder as he had planned, he would use another method. His eyes fixed on Hope, the white horse Marina loved so much. A terrible idea began to form in his corrupted mind. If he could separate Marina from her protectors and lure her into the arena under some pretext involving Hope, he could still create a convincing accident. Isabel, observing the expressions that crossed Eduardo's face, felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew that look. It was the same one she had seen the night he planned to use Thunder. The danger had not passed. It had merely changed form. Clara?" she murmured urgently, approaching Marina's mother. "He's planning something new. We need to get Marina out of here immediately." But it was too late. Eduardo was already heading towards his daughter with that false smile Marina had learned to fear, and in his hands he carried a lead rope, the same type used to guide unruly horses. The turning point that should have saved Marina had only forced her father to improvise an even more dangerous plan. Eduardo approached Marina with calculated steps, his forced smile contrasting brutally with the coldness in his eyes. The lead rope in his hand swung gently, a detail the girl's observant mind registered with growing discomfort. "Marina, darling," he said with a false sweetness that made Isabel stiffen in the distance. "How about we show our special guests how well you and Hope understand each other?" The girl tilted her head, her acute instincts detecting something wrong with her father's proposal. Hope, still in her nearby stall, whinnied softly, as if also sensing the imminent danger. "Now?" Marina asked, her fingers intensifying their repetitive movement. "But Hope doesn't like crowds. She gets nervous with too much noise." "Precisely why it will be so impressive," Eduardo insisted, extending his hand to his daughter. "Do you imagine how impressed our investors will be to see a special girl like you controlling a horse that others can't?" Isabel took a step forward, every fiber of her being screaming danger. "Mr. Sterling, perhaps it's better to wait for a calmer moment. The young lady seems anxious today." Eduardo cast an icy glare at the governess. "Isabel, I don't recall asking for your opinion. Marina is my daughter, and I decide what's best for her." Clara, observing the scene from a distance, felt panic seize her chest. Through the crowd of elegant guests, she could see the sinister determination on her husband's face. He had found a new way to execute his terrible plan. Marina looked at Hope, then at her father, her mind processing the situation with the characteristic logic of her condition. If Hope gets scared of people, she might get hurt, she said with her direct honesty. And that's why you'll be there to calm her, Eduardo replied, his patience clearly exhausted. Oh, come on, Marina, we don't have all day. Dr. Hayes, who continued his veterinary examination in the stables, noticed the unusual movement. Thunder remained under observation after the alarming preliminary test results, but there was something in the atmosphere that made him uneasy. How long has this black stallion been displaying aggressive behavior? He asked one of the stable hands. Since this morning, Doctor. Yesterday he was normal, but today he woke up completely altered. Dr. Hayes made more notes, his decades of experience telling him that much more was going on at that property than a simple case of sports doping. Meanwhile, Eduardo finally managed to lure Marina away from her protectors. The girl, genuinely concerned about Hope's well-being, allowed her father to lead her towards the main arena, where hundreds of spectators awaited the afternoon presentations. Isabel tried to follow them, but Eduardo deliberately chose a path through the densest part of the crowd, using the guests as a natural barrier to prevent the governess from interfering. Clara, Isabel urgently murmured as she approached Marina's mother. He's taking her to the arena. We need to do something now. Clara looked desperately around, seeking help, but everyone present saw only a proud father leading his daughter for a special presentation. No one could imagine the malice hidden behind that seemingly innocent scene. In the arena, Eduardo positioned Marina exactly where he had planned, in the center, away from the protective barriers, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses who would later attest that everything had been a tragic accident. Now, Marina, he said, his voice filled with an urgency the girl couldn't comprehend. Call Hope. Show everyone how you two connect. Marina felt a wave of anxiety invade her chest. Hope didn't like the main arena. She knew that. The horse preferred smaller, more intimate spaces where she could interact with her without the pressure of external gazes. Daddy, maybe it's better if we come back later, she said, her voice small, revealing her growing discomfort. Hope won't like all this noise. Call the horse, Marina, Eduardo ordered, all pretense of gentleness vanishing from his voice. Now. It was at that moment that Marina understood, with the devastating clarity that characterized her unique perception, that something was terribly wrong. The patterns her exceptional mind had been registering for weeks finally connected into a terrifying image. Her father wasn't trying to show her special connection with Hope to the guests. He was trying to put her in danger, using the horse she loved most as an instrument of her own destruction. Panic seized Marina, her repetitive movements intensifying dramatically as she tried to process a reality her young mind refused to fully accept. In the crowd, Isabel desperately pushed her way through, knowing that every second could be the difference between Marina's life and death. Marina remained in the center of the arena, her hypersensitive senses picking up every nuance of the situation around her. The scent of her father's nervous sweat, the restless murmur of the crowd, the distant sound of Hope whinnying with a note of alarm she had never heard before. Everything formed a sensory mosaic that screamed danger. Marina. Eduardo's voice had lost all trace of patience. Call the horse now, or there will be consequences. The explicit threat hit the girl like a punch to the gut. In her 7 years of life, she had never heard her father speak that way, with a raw cruelty that no longer tried to disguise itself as paternal care. Her repetitive movements intensified dramatically, her fingers tapping faster and faster patterns as her mind tried to process an unacceptable reality. Her own father wanted to hurt her. Isabel finally managed to reach the edges of the arena, her heart pounding as she saw Marina in the center of the open space, vulnerable and clearly in panic. Eduardo had strategically positioned himself between the governess and the girl, using his own body as a barrier. "Marina, darling," Isabel shouted over the murmur of the crowd, "come here with me." Eduardo turned with an expression of fury that made several spectators instinctively recoil. "Isabel, if you take another step, I'll fire you on the spot and make sure you never work again." The threat was real, but Isabel had already decided that Marina's life was worth more than her own financial security. She took another step towards the arena. Dr. Robert Hayes, who had finished his preliminary examination in the stables, approached the crowd, drawn by the commotion. His decades of experience immediately told him that something was profoundly wrong with the situation. "What's going on here?" he asked Clara, who watched the scene with tears streaming down her face. "My husband," Clara struggled to find words. "He's forcing Marina to do something she doesn't want to. She's scared." Dr. Hayes observed Marina in the center of the arena, noticing the classic signs of sensory overload in an autistic child. "This child is in an extreme state of panic," he murmured. "Gosh, she needs to be removed from this situation immediately." In the center of the arena, Marina made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of obeying her father's command or fleeing towards Isabel, she sat down on the ground and began to rock back and forth, a self-soothing behavior that helped her cope with situations of extreme overload. "Get up!" Eduardo yelled, his mask of respectability finally falling completely. "Get up and call that damn horse." The explicit cruelty in Eduardo's voice made the crowd murmur uneasily. Even those who didn't fully understand the situation could see that something was terribly wrong. Marina, still rocking, began to emit a low, rhythmic sound, a vocalization she made when she was extremely stressed. It was a sound that Hope knew well, a sign that her special friend was in danger. From the stable, Hope's urgent whinny echoed across the estate. The white horse had broken the latch on her stall, something she had never done before, and now galloped towards the arena with a determination that startled the stable hands. "Someone stop that horse!" Eduardo yelled, realizing his plan was spectacularly crumbling. A loose horse, running towards a panicked child, would create exactly the kind of chaos he had planned, but not in the way he expected. Clara finally found the courage to act, pushing people out of the way. She ran towards the arena, shouting, "Marina, Mummy's coming!" Dr. Hayes followed Clara, his professional authority clearing a path through the crowd. "This child needs immediate medical attention," he announced loudly. "She's having a sensory overload meltdown." Isabel, seizing the distraction, jumped the arena barrier and ran towards Marina, completely ignoring Eduardo's furious shouts. Marina looked up when she saw Isabel approaching, her tears finally beginning to fall. "Isabel," she sobbed, "Daddy wants to hurt me. I don't know why, but he wants to hurt me." The girl's innocent confession was heard by dozens of people nearby, creating a wave of shock that spread through the crowd like wildfire. Indignant whispers began to propagate among the guests. Eduardo realized he had completely lost control of the situation. His careful plan had turned into a public disaster that exposed his true nature before hundreds of important witnesses. In a panic, he made one last desperate attempt at salvation. "Marina is having an episode," he yelled to the crowd. "She invents stories when she gets like this. It's part of her condition." But it was too late. The sound of approaching hooves announced the arrival of Hope, who entered the arena not as a threat, but as a desperate protector running to defend her special friend. Hope burst into the arena like a force of nature, her hooves echoing against the packed earth in a rhythm that seemed synchronized with Marina's accelerated heartbeat. The white horse, normally gentle and calm, showed a fierce determination that surprised even the most experienced stable hands. The crowd instinctively recoiled at the sight of the loose animal, but Hope completely ignored the spectators. Her eyes were fixed on a single objective, Marina, who remained sitting in the center of the arena, still rocking and emitting that low sound that indicated extreme emotional distress. "Stay back!" Eduardo yelled, trying to regain control of the situation. The horse is dangerous, but Dr. Hayes, with his decades of experience working with animals, observed something completely different. This horse is not acting aggressively," he said loudly enough for others to hear. "He's demonstrating protective behavior." Hope approached Marina with a delicacy that completely contradicted the urgency of her run. The horse lowered her head to the girl's level, emitting a soft whinny that Marina immediately recognized. It was the same sound she made when he found her crying after arguments with her father. Marina looked up, her tears ceasing momentarily at the sight of her special friend. "Hope," she whispered, extending a trembling hand to touch the velvety muzzle. "You came to protect me." The horse remained perfectly still as Marina slowly stood up, leaning on him to find both physical and emotional balance. The connection between them was so pure and evident that even the most cynical spectators were touched by the scene. Isabel reached Marina at the same moment, kneeling beside the girl and wrapping her in a protective embrace. "It's all right now, darling," she murmured, her own tears wetting Marina's hair. "I won't let anyone hurt you." Eduardo watched the scene with a mixture of fury and despair. His plan had not only failed, but had transformed into a public demonstration of the genuine love Marina inspired in everyone around her. Everyone except himself. Clara finally managed to reach the arena, running towards her daughter with a determination that surprised even herself. 20 years of passive submission evaporated before the urgent need to protect Marina. "Marina, my love," Clara said, joining the embrace with Isabel. "Mommy's here. You're safe." Dr. Hayes approached the group, his presence offering medical authority that Eduardo could not contest. "This child needs to be removed from this situation immediately," he declared. "She is clearly suffering significant psychological trauma." "She's my daughter," Eduardo protested, but his voice sounded hollow even to himself. "And that's precisely why this situation is so disturbing," Dr. Hayes replied coldly. "Any true parent would be comforting their child, not forcing her to remain in a situation that clearly terrifies her." Marina, still nestled between Isabel and Clara, looked directly at her father. With that brutal honesty that characterized her condition, she said in a voice clear enough for many to hear, "Daddy, why don't you love me? I always tried to be good to you." The question cut through the air like a knife, creating an absolute silence in the arena. Hundreds of people witnessed an innocent child confronting parental rejection in the most direct way possible. Eduardo felt the weight of all eyes on him. Decades of careful reputation building collapsed at that moment before the devastating simplicity of his daughter's question. Hope remained beside Marina throughout the interaction, like a silent guardian. The horse seemed to instinctively understand that his presence offered not only physical protection, but also emotional comfort for the traumatized girl. I love you," Eduardo lied, but the words sounded empty, even to him. Marina, with her exceptional ability to read expressions and body language, shook her head sadly. "No, you don't love me," she said with that honesty that always irritated him. "Your eyes get different when you look at me, like I'm something bad you wanted to disappear." The girl's extraordinary perception exposed the truth in a way no adult would dare. Eduardo Sterling, powerful businessman and skillful manipulator, was completely disarmed by the simple honesty of a 7-year-old child. Dr. Hayes made notes on his clipboard, documenting not only the animal's behavior, but also the disturbing family dynamics he was witnessing. "Mr. Sterling," he said formally, "I strongly recommend you seek professional help to address these family issues. What I'm seeing here goes far beyond normal parenting challenges." The crowd began to disperse, but the indignant whispers continued. Eduardo's reputation as an exemplary father had been irreparably damaged before the most important people in his social and professional circle. In the days that followed the event, the Sterling estate transformed into an epicenter of investigations and revelations that shook not only the family, but the entire rural elite community. Dr. Hayes had fulfilled his promise to document everything he witnessed, and his detailed notes became crucial pieces in an investigation that grew exponentially. Marina remained under the constant care of Isabel and Clara, who had formed an unbreakable protective alliance. The girl showed clear signs of trauma. Her repetitive movements intensified, and a new reluctance to leave safe spaces. Only in Hope's presence did she find some relief for her increasing anxiety. Eduardo desperately tried to control the damage to his reputation, but every attempt at explanation only dug him a deeper hole. The recordings Isabel had secretly made, combined with the photographs of the documents Clara had discovered, painted a devastating picture of corruption and family cruelty. "We need to talk about what happened," said Dr. Evelyn Reed, the social worker who had been called to assess Marina's situation. Dr. Reed was a specialist in child abuse and autism cases, and her presence on the property marked an irreversible change in the family dynamic. Marina sat beside Hope, who had been brought closer to the house to offer constant emotional support to the girl. The horse remained calm, but alert, as if understanding that dangers still lurked around his special friend. "Marina, can you tell me in your own words what happened in the arena?" Dr. Reed asked, with the gentleness that characterized her work with traumatized children. Marina looked at Isabel, who nodded encouragingly, then at Clara, who held her hands tenderly. With her characteristic honesty, she began to recount not only the events of the arena, but also weeks of observations that her exceptional mind had registered. "Daddy got mad when I talked about the numbers he said on the phone," Marina explained, her words coming out slowly but precisely. "He burned papers in the backyard when men came at night. And yesterday he wanted me to call Hope into the arena, but his eyes were different, like when he gets mad, only worse." Dr. Reed made careful notes, impressed by the clarity and detail of the girl's observations. Marina's condition, which her father saw as a problem, had proven to be a powerful tool for exposing the truth. "And how did you feel when your father spoke to you?" the specialist continued. Marina touched Hope's muzzle before responding. "Would like I was wrong, like he wanted me to be different or that I didn't exist." The devastating simplicity of the answer made Clara openly sob. Isabel put a protective arm around Marina's shoulders, her fury against Eduardo growing with each revelation. Meanwhile, in the office that had been sealed by authorities, investigators discovered evidence that went far beyond emotional abuse. The financial documents revealed a complex network of large-scale tax evasion, bribing officials, and rigging results in equestrian competitions. "This man is not just a negligent father," the lead detective on the case told his colleagues. "He is a sophisticated criminal who saw his own daughter as a threat to his illegal businesses." Eduardo was formally indicted not only for assault with intent to injure and child abuse, but also for a series of financial crimes that could result in decades in prison. His pre-trial detention was ordered after investigators discovered he had tried to hire the same man who doped Thunder to permanently resolve the marina problem. The news spread like wildfire through the rural community. Families who had known the Sterlings for years struggled to reconcile Eduardo's public image as a respected businessman with the reality of his domestic cruelty. Clara, for the first time in 20 years, felt truly free. The investigation had revealed secret bank accounts and properties that Eduardo maintained in her name, ensuring that she and Marina would have financial security independent of any court decision. "Mommy," Marina said one evening, as they watched Hope grazing peacefully in the field near the house, "can I talk about the truth now without making anyone mad?" Clara hugged her daughter, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Yes, my love, you can always tell the truth. And no matter what you say, I will always love you exactly as you are." Isabel, who had decided to remain with the family in their new configuration, observed the scene with deep satisfaction. 2 decades of forced silence had ended, and she had discovered that protecting Marina was worth any personal risk. Dr. Hayes continued his regular visits, no longer as an investigator, but as a family friend. His evaluations confirmed that Marina, despite the recent trauma, was beginning to flourish in an environment of total acceptance. Her connection with animals is extraordinary, he explained to Clara and Isabel. It's not just a peculiarity, it's a genuine gift that should be nurtured, not suppressed. Marina smiled upon hearing this, for the first time in weeks allowing herself to believe that being different was not something to be ashamed of, but something to be celebrated. The day of the trial arrived with a somber gravity that seemed to weigh upon the entire region. Marina, now 8 years old, had visibly grown in the months following her father's arrest. But the prospect of confronting him again in court awakened anxieties she could barely express. Clara dressed Marina with special care that morning, choosing a light blue dress that the girl had said was her favorite color, the same color as Hope's gentle eyes. Isabel remained close, offering the silent support that had become essential for Marina's emotional stability. "You don't have to be afraid," Clara said, kneeling to be at her daughter's eye level. "You just need to tell the truth, as you always do, and we'll be right there with you." Marina nodded, her fingers tracing familiar patterns in the air, a habit that had become less frequent in recent months, but which still emerged in moments of particular stress. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, members of the rural community, and curious onlookers had gathered to witness the trial that had become a symbol of the struggle between power and justice. Eduardo Sterling, once a respected figure, now sat at the defendant's bench with an expression that alternated between contained fury and despair. When Marina entered the courtroom, a respectful silence fell over the room. She walked between Clara and Isabel, her upright posture demonstrating a dignity that contrasted sharply with her young age. Eduardo looked up when he saw his daughter approach. For a moment, something that could have been remorse passed across his face, but it was quickly replaced by the cold, calculating expression Marina knew so well. "Marina Sterling," the judge called gently. "Can you approach to give your testimony?" Marina nodded and walked towards the witness stand with measured steps. Her condition made her extraordinarily sensitive to the environment around her, and she could feel the emotions of hundreds of people focused on her. "Marina," said the prosecutor, Mr. David Miller, in a gentle voice he had specifically practiced for this moment, "can you tell us, in your own words, how your father treated you at home?" Marina looked directly at Eduardo before responding, her clear eyes meeting his without wavering. "And he got mad when I told the truth about things I saw. He said I was a problem and that others didn't like me because of the way I am." "And how did that make you feel?" the prosecutor continued. "Like I was wrong," Marina replied, with that devastating honesty that characterized all her interactions, like he wanted me to be different or that I would disappear forever. A restless murmur ran through the room. Eduardo tried to maintain his composure, but his hands trembled slightly on the defense table. "Marina," the prosecutor said, "can you tell us about the day of the event in the arena?" Marina took a deep breath, unconsciously touching the necklace Clara had given her, a small silver horse that reminded her of Hope. "Daddy took me to the center of the arena and told me to call Hope, but his eyes were different. Scary, like when he burned papers in the backyard or talked to the bad men on the phone." "What did you think he wanted to happen?" the prosecutor asked gently. Marina looked at Eduardo again, and this time tears began to form in her eyes. "I think he wanted Hope to hurt me, so I would stop talking about the bad things he did." The simple, devastating confession of an 8-year-old child cut through the air like a knife. Several people in the audience began to cry openly, including some of the jurors. Eduardo finally stood up, his composure completely breaking. "She doesn't understand," he yelled. "She's autistic. She makes things up. She can't testify against me." The judge pounded his gavel energetically. "Mr. Sterling, sit down immediately." Marina observed her father's emotional outburst with a calm that surprised everyone. When silence returned to the room, she said in a clear voice, "I don't make things up. My memory is better than most people's, and I remember everything you did." It was at that moment that Eduardo fully understood he had lost. The daughter he had tried to silence had found not only her voice, but also the courage to use it against him. "Marina," the judge said gently, "is there anything else you would like to tell us?" Marina looked at Clara and Isabel, who encouraged her with smiles through their tears. "I just wanted him to love me the way I am," she said finally, "like Hope loves me, like Mommy and Isabel love me, but he never could." The simplicity of Marina's final statement echoed through the room in absolute silence. A child had exposed the complete moral bankruptcy of a powerful man with words more devastating than any sophisticated legal argument. Eduardo lowered his head, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had lost, not only his freedom and fortune, but also the chance to truly know the extraordinary child who was his daughter. The jury's decision was unanimous and devastating for Eduardo Sterling. Convicted of assault with intent to injure, child abuse, large-scale tax evasion, bribing public officials, and criminal conspiracy, he would face decades behind bars. The man who once commanded a rural empire now found himself reduced to a number in a prison cell. Marina observed the sentencing with a serenity that impressed everyone present. When the judge announced that Eduardo would permanently lose custody and any visitation rights, she showed neither joy nor sadness, just a deep relief that manifested in the relaxation of her tense shoulders. "It's over, my love," Clara whispered, hugging her daughter as they left the courtroom. "You'll never have to be afraid of him again." Isabel, walking beside them, carried a folder with documents that changed everything. During the process, it had been discovered that Eduardo maintained secret accounts and properties in Clara and Marina's names, attempting to hide assets from tax authorities. Ironically, his own dishonesty had secured the financial future of the family he had tried to destroy. In the months that followed, the Sterling estate underwent an extraordinary transformation. Clara, finally free from her husband's toxic influence, revealed an inner strength that surprised even herself. With Isabel's support and the guidance of autism specialists, she began to convert the property into something completely different. "I want to transform this place into an equine therapy center for neurodivergent children," Clara announced during a meeting with architects and specialized therapists. "My daughter showed me that the connection with animals can heal wounds that words cannot reach." Marina, now 9 years old, flourished extraordinarily in this new environment of total acceptance. Her condition, which Eduardo had seen as a curse, proved to be an extraordinary gift for understanding and communicating with horses in ways that specialists considered revolutionary. Dr. Hayes became a regular visitor, no longer as an investigator, but as a scientific consultant fascinated by Marina's unique ability. She can detect health problems in horses even before obvious symptoms appear, he explained to a team of visiting veterinarians. "It's as if she speaks a language we are still learning to understand." Hope remained the emotional center of Marina's new life. The white horse had become not only her companion, but also her co-therapist in sessions with other autistic children who began to visit the property. Isabel officially assumed the role of center coordinator, her decades of experience caring for Marina providing valuable insights for other families struggling to understand and support their neurodivergent children. "Every child is unique," Isabel explained to visiting parents, "but they all need the same thing, unconditional love and total acceptance of who they truly are." A year after the trial, Marina received an unexpected letter. Eduardo had written from prison, his words revealing a belated understanding of what he had lost. "Marina, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I spent so long seeing your difference as a problem that I never saw your beauty. You are extraordinary. and I was too blind to realize it. I hope one day you can remember that, despite everything, there is a part of me that always loved you, even when I didn't know how to show it." Marina read the letter in the presence of Clara and Isabel, their expressions attentive. When she finished, she carefully folded the paper and put it in a special box alongside other important memories. "Do you want to respond?" Clara asked gently. Marina considered the question with the seriousness that characterized all her important decisions. "Maybe one day," she finally said. "When I better understand what it means to forgive someone who hurt us." The answer demonstrated extraordinary emotional maturity for a 9-year-old child, revealing how her traumatic experiences had been transformed into wisdom through proper love and support. That afternoon, Marina rode Hope for the first time since the event in the arena. The white horse carried her gently through the fields that had once been the scene of so much suffering and were now transforming into a sanctuary of healing and hope. "Hope," she murmured, stroking the silky mane, "thank you for protecting me when I needed it most. Now we can help other children feel safe too." The horse whinnied softly, as he always did when Marina spoke to him. To outside observers, it might seem like coincidence, but Marina knew it was genuine communication. Clara joined them, hugging her daughter as they observed the joyful movement of the property. "You know something, Marina. I think your father was wrong about a lot of things, but especially about you being a problem. You are the solution, not just for our family, but for so many others too." Marina smiled, that radiant smile that had become her trademark. "Mommy, I think some people need more time to understand that being different is being special, but one day everyone will understand." As the stars began to appear in the sky, Marina knew she had found not only her voice, but also her purpose. The Hope Haven Equestrian Center would continue to grow, touching lives and transforming the way the world viewed children like her. The girl who was once rejected for her difference had become living proof that true love does not seek perfection, but accepts and celebrates authenticity in all its wonderful forms.